Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Age Group Triathlon podcast. My name is Simon Olney. I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode, I'm going to be looking at what I think makes bad triathlon coaching and good triathlon coaching. Now, some of you will sit there and go, well, hang on a minute, what gives this guy the right to declare what is good triathlon coaching? What gives him the right to put down other coaches? And, I'm definitely not going to put down any individual coaches, that'd be highly unprofessional. I'm simply going to list qualities that I see in other coaches that I admire, qualities that I've tried to bring to my own coaching. I mean, I've been doing this for 9 years professionally now, full time, so I've got a relatively good handle on it. I've got a pretty decent track record. I try not to throw numbers around, but very few athletes who come to me end up failing their goals. And so I think that I've gained some experience over the years, and I really want to save athletes from spending a lot of money on coaching that may not actually be very good. Now, the first one I wanted to touch on is the idea of hiring a coach based on their own athletic track record. You get a lot of athletes who will go shopping for coaches. Generally, athletes kind of with a budget and big goals, and those generally newer to the sport as well. I say, I want a professional athlete to be my coach. And you know what? I can see the appeal. If somebody can complete an Ironman in under 9 hours, surely we should listen to what they have to say, right? If somebody has dedicated their life to the sport, surely having them help us is going to be the best possible option for us to achieve our goals, right? Well, there are a couple of reasons why an ex-professional or elite athlete may not be the best choice for you. They may be the best choice, but a couple of things to think about here. First of all, does this person understand my situation? If you are looking at working with someone who retired from the sport in their early 20s and is now in their late 20s without a family, without many commitments, without a full-time job, and they are doing a bit of coaching on the side, is this person really going to understand what it's like juggling, a 45-hour work week, 2 children, family, running a household, everything that comes with that? The second reason is that, the athlete within their career, they will have probably tried a lot of different training methods, and they'll have found something that worked for them, and they would have stuck with that training methodology throughout their career. Guess what training methodology you will end up using in your training? Yep, the one that worked for them. Now, again, this may not be every single ex-professional that does this, but the vast majority, they're going to come into a coaching relationship with the idea of, well, if it worked for me, it will work for them. And at the end of the day, this just isn't the case. If they swam 6 times a week, if they were putting in regular 6-hour rides on the weekends, if they went for a really high volume approach, they're going to say to you, well, why is it that you can't fit more training in? And if you turn around and you say, well, I've got to do this with my children, I've got to run this, I had to stay late at work, I wasn't able to get the session in, they're not going to understand that, and they're constantly going to be pushing you to put in more volume. You need to fit more time in. We need to get more time on the saddle. We need to get more time on our feet. We need to get in the pool far more regularly. And it's going to end up being a real source of frustration for both of you, because the coach may well not end up really listening to what it is that you have to say, because they are so focused on this high volume approach because it worked for them, so it's going to work for other people. And there's also the genetic aspect of it as well. Perfect example, Michael Phelps. I think we all know, looking at the size of that man's arm span, why he was so efficient in the pool. Now, if he were to go from the pool and move into coaching, which I don't think he is, but you can understand how he isn't going to be able to replicate the same success that he had by coaching other people, because they're not simply going to be as physically gifted as he is. Now, Michael Phelps is an extreme example, but it's a good visualization because of physically how tall and wide his arm span is. We can just see how he's suited for swimming. Now, when it comes to triathlon, if you have somebody who is just naturally really light with a really high VO2 max, well, guess what? they're going to try and coach you in a way that suited them. Now, a good coach, if somebody decides that they are going to pursue coaching and that they are going to, an ex-pro this is, and they decide to go down this coach education route and they decide to really learn as much as they can about themselves and their coaching and athletes, chances are over time that their approach will change. I mean, we all grow, right? But I wanted to get people to think twice before they immediately swerve towards working with an ex-professional athlete or even sometimes current professional athlete or elite athlete simply based on what it is that they do, because they can be quite close-minded, they can be quite inflexible, and they can have a lack of patience for anyone who isn't able to do the training in the way that they did themselves. Now, one of the more common coaching models that you get in the UK is an athlete who is very talented at triathlon. It may be they're an Ironman athlete who went to Kona, and they volunteer with the local triathlon club, where they're on poolside and they're mucking in, they're helping out, helping athletes with their swim technique. But anyone who's training for an Ironman, they go, oh, well, if you want some help, I've got my tried and tested Ironman plan, and I got to Kona. And this is the kind of thing that a lot of newer athletes are going to fall hook, line, and sinker for. They're going to go, oh, he went to Kona. When you're just starting out in the sport, anyone who even completed an Ironman feels like a demigod, let alone someone who went to Kona. And they get sort of caught up in this and they go, yes, you can have my Ironman plan for £250. And it's the same plan they give everybody else. Sometimes they'll claim it's bespoke, sometimes they'll be honest. But generally speaking, the idea is you've got this overpriced plan that has some kind of secret sauce in it that's going to help you achieve your goals. Now, this in my mind is straight up bad coaching. There is so much that comes with coaching. You have to understand somebody's availability. You have to understand where somebody sits with all three sports currently. There is a vast amount that you need to understand. And if you are getting, if this plan that they're giving you, working on the assumption is simply a list of workouts, okay, and you have no real ability to discuss the plan with them or for them to edit the plan around you, if it's just a copy paste, there you go, shake your hand, and if you are trying to ask them any questions on the follow-up to that, may end up being a bit evasive and defensive about it all. This is the kind of coaching relationship that gives triathlon coaches a bad name. I'm not saying that they are being dishonest, but it is, they are charging a high amount for something that is quite low quality, and they are being slightly aggressive with their sales policy as well. They're using their role within the club and also their own athletic success as a real sort of pushy sort of sales tactic, and it just gives me the ick. And now, I am not suggesting that there is no correlation between somebody's athletic ability and their ability to coach. If you have somebody who has never even completed a triathlon, who tried to set themselves up as a triathlon coach, obviously there are going to be some pretty hard questions there. But it's, and on my website, I definitely talk about, some championship titles that I've won, the different races, that I've won, to give people the idea that, I've been there, I've experienced success myself. But if it is somebody's primary sales tactic, if you look at a coach's bio, and 90% of it is all about the races they've done, and I did this position, I got this podium and this championship, that should really be a red flag. The next up is sort of the opposite to this in a way, which is coaches who, instead of leaning on that athletic success, coaches who lean overly on their qualifications. Now, there is a very certain type of coach and athlete who believe that an athlete's qualifications or the level of qualification they have is everything. It could be that an athlete is shopping for coaches and will only consider a coach that has this, BTF level 3, or what we now call a high performing coach. Or it could be that a coach believes that because they have this qualification, that they have all the answers. And nobody should question them. And if they do, they'll just wave their qualification in their face and go, yes, but I have this piece of paper which tells me that I'm right. Now, I definitely sort of fell into this trap a bit when I first started out. I mean, my coaching journey was quite unusual compared to many people's in that I started um, as a coach at the age of 26. So, it's a weird place because some people they study sports science and they move into sport and coaching from a young age because that's where their skills are. And on the other hand, you have people who move into coaching sort of later in life. When they discover the sport, they do well. A lot of people in their 40s and 50s, they have a bit more spare time than people in their 30s or their 20s, and they will sort of start up this little business on the side. Now, being young and without any client sort of testimonials, I thought to myself, well, how is it that I can be taken seriously as a coach? It's one thing if people know you, but if people ask, because I was in London at the time, if people are shopping around for triathlon coaches in the London area, there's a lot of choice. How can I stand out? And I thought, well, I start doing my qualifications. That seems the sensible route. So I started out on my British triathlon education journey. That seemed like the most important one. I became an Ironman certified coach. I became a swimming teacher. I trained as a level 3 personal trainer, then a level 4 personal trainer, specialising in strength and conditioning. I studied to become a certified nutrition coach, a corrective exercise specialist, a Training Peaks level 2 coach. I've got qualifications coming out my ears, but you don't really hear me talking about them. In fact, when I'm writing a bio, I actually remove a good handful of the qualifications that I have because it's just noise. Now, part of the reason that I decided to take all these qualifications is that I didn't want to give somebody a reason not to hire me. I didn't want somebody to be looking through coaches and go, oh yes, but I want somebody with a nutrition qualification. They go and hire somebody who has a separate nutrition certification. So I thought, right, I really want to sort of cover all my bases, and I want to improve my knowledge as well, which is, an overlooked part of qualifications for some people, in that, they already know the contents, they just want to pass the exam to show that they know it. Like, especially for me going into my strength and conditioning course, I really wanted to learn a huge amount. I didn't spend a lot of time in the gym when I was young. I don't know all these exercises like the back of my hand. And I really went in there to learn the content of the course, not just to get the certificate. However, I'm under no illusion that any of these qualifications that I have make me a better coach than anyone else. There are some very good coaches out there who don't have any qualifications. The fact that I'm a British triathlon high performing coach doesn't immediately make me better than them by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously, they may be on slightly shaky ground legally if anyone was able to, take legal action against them. But, that's a big what if. I wanted to cover my bases, I did my qualifications, but the fact that I've got these qualifications doesn't mean that I know everything, and I always will. And when I first started out coaching, I had a mentor, a coach who I worked with, who it was pretty clear to me that he hadn't really done any professional development since sort of the 80s, maybe even the 70s when he first got his qualifications. And he was a really old school coach, and you'd ask him questions, and you get a bit sort of defensive, or he bat them away. He'd say, "Oh, that's not important. You don't need to worry about that," or something to that effect. But because he was in his 60s, and he had this gruff demeanour about him, this sort of no nonsense coach, a lot of athletes fawned over him. And I'm not saying he was a bad coach. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that he could have been a much better coach if he'd kept up with his coach education beyond the sort of the qualifications required for him to do his job. And I think that's a trap that some sort of slightly older school coaches fall into, where they got their certificates and they feel that they know everything now, and they don't need to keep up to date with the latest trends in training. And the reason this is important, for me at least, is that science changes. Well, science itself doesn't change, our understanding of science changes. If I look at even the kind of things that I learned in 2016 when I first started coaching, they have changed dramatically. The messaging that we're giving athletes, the importance we place upon certain things, new products have come out that really simplify things. We have understood a lot more about the human body, and especially from the nutrition side of things, The recommendations we give around fueling races has changed as well. If you're not keeping up to date with the latest developments, I'm sorry, but that doesn't make you a great coach. You are doing a bit of a disservice to your athletes if you just lean on your qualifications and go, oh yes, well, I'm a level 5 England athletics coach, so everyone has to listen to me. Now, speaking of qualifications, there are a lot of coaches out there who are, at the end of the day, frustrated sports scientists. These are people who, they really got into sport when they were younger, quite good athletes, but they wanted to be academic. They didn't want to sort of bet on a professional sporting career. So they went to university and they studied sports science. Now, if you study sports science, you learn an enormous amount, much more than I know, about the human body and what it can do and how it affects different things affect performance, and you can get this wealth of knowledge. You can also study various related subjects, kinesiology. I'm sure there's something around performance nutrition. I'm sort of putting these all together unfairly in a group called sports science, and people then graduate. And honestly, it's quite difficult to find a job within sports science itself as an industry. If you want to do something on the research side of things, that's obviously difficult, because you have to get funding to be able to do studies. You could work in a lab where you can run performance assessments, but at the end of that can get a little bit monotonous. It's not especially exciting. Having this treadmill of all these athletes come in and do their testing day after day. So a lot of sports science graduates go, well, you know what, I'm going to become a coach. And this is not an inherently bad idea. There's a lot more variety as opposed to if you were just working in a lab. You have a huge amount of scope for continued professional development, and you really help people achieve their dreams. I mean, coaching is the best job in the world, if you ask me. The issue with this is that you have a lot of sports scientists who are coaches who put way too much emphasis on things that don't really matter. So you can get coaches who get really upset around even things such as the absolute definition of lactate threshold 1 and lactate threshold 2, or those who sort of really put athletes through the rinser to try to get their FTP accurate within 2 to 3 watts. And these are all things that either can come down to sort of the margin of error in testing anyway, but also how an athlete's feeling on a day. And the result that you get may be slightly different from 1 week to the next anyway, depending on fatigue levels. And of course, all of their knowledge comes from, a lot of measuring performance and how we can be really accurate about that. But as triathletes, okay, it may be a little bit different if somebody is a cyclist. But as triathletes, how much do we really need to worry about being absolutely hyper accurate? Would you rather have a coach who obsesses over getting all the ducks in a row with the data, or somebody who understands your needs, somebody who listens to you, and somebody who really engages with you as an athlete? Now, there are a lot of phenomenal coaches out there, much better coaches than myself, who have degrees in a related field and they do really well. Because they've taken that sports science background, but they understand what good coaching is, and they develop and they grow as coaches. And that emotional intelligence part that comes with coaching, they start to develop as well. The British Triathlon High Performing Coach Programme is primarily built around not so much the nuts and bolts, it's how to coach human beings. And that is something that a lot of people who come through elite sport and universities and go through this really traditional route, something they can struggle with, which is to see the athlete as being a human being rather than a series of numbers. And so, again, I'm not saying don't hire someone who is a sports scientist graduate. That's not what I'm saying at all. But if you are looking at someone that all they talk about is their sports science background, and then maybe haven't got an enormous amount of experience coaching yet, again, it's just something to consider. Now, along with coaches who are very quick to dismiss any kind of new training methodologies, because always worked for me in the past, You also have coaches who don't embrace new technology, and this really is to the detriment of their athletes. They say, "Oh, this you don't need this." Um, they'll see. I remember one coach that I worked with, and I was in a group chat with as part of a club, and I shared sort of a new product that had been developed by a swimming company. Oh, this looks interesting. I thought I'd share it. This guy goes, "Oh, whatever next are they going to come up with?" And it's having that very like closed mindset. Now it turns out the product in question did absolutely tank, and I've never seen one in use. Um, but it's rather than looking at it and go, oh, okay, so this is interesting. How could this potentially help my athletes? It's people who immediately dismiss anything new. I think we all know people like that in life in general. But if you do want a coach who has your best interests at heart, who does prioritize your performance, they do need to look at things with a bit of an open mind. The alternative to this, which is no better really, is the coach who jumps on every single bandwagon going. I mean, it's if you consider, these sort of what do they call, like sort of tech bros, crypto bros, people who, as soon as anything new appears in a marketplace, they're convinced that this is going to be the absolute best thing, and they throw loads of money at it. And yeah, sure, some of them make a lot of money out of it, but also a lot of people go broke and bankrupt by jumping on every single bandwagon that comes along. And this is also true of coaching. There's a lot of uh, tech that comes out that just doesn't catch on. I remember sort of some blood oxygen sensors around about sort of 4 or 5 years ago. A lot of people were talking about these, and guess what? I haven't really seen or heard any of them since. The Super Sapiens blood glucose monitor as well. They went bust. People just weren't really interested in the product. There is a lot of technology that comes and goes, and you do have to come sit it from sort of a balanced viewpoint. You have to educate yourself about it. You have to learn about it, and you have to go, okay, so how could this help my athletes? And if you can see a good reason why it may help your athletes, then it may be something that you can at least feel free to discuss. There's a big difference between understanding something and recommending something. Some new tech that comes along, I'd never recommend to my athletes, go, oh, you need to get yourself one of these. But if they come to me and say, hey, I saw this advert for this for this new sensor, and I'm wondering whether that would be any use, I want to feel that I can at least have a conversation with them about it on basic terms, even if not an expert, just to discuss it with them and see what I think might be good about it, what I think might not work about it. Feel free to share my opinion. And if I don't really have an opinion on it, to be honest and go, you know what? Honestly, I haven't heard of that. Can you send me a link? And I'll let you know what I think. The other one is coaches who sort of have the mindset of do as I say, not what I do, which I always find a bit concerning in any walk of life, which is coaches who ask athletes to do things that they would never do themselves, um, or coaches who don't do any swimming, cycling, or running. Now, I can completely understand if somebody was doing sub 10 Ironmans back in the day, they shouldn't feel the need to maintain that level of performance all the way through their coaching career. They can afford to put their feet up and go, you know what, maybe I will go back and do an Ironman once every sort of 3 to 4 years, to keep my hand in it. But honestly, I have other things in my life that I need to focus on. Triathlon coaching, for me at least, it is sort of a surprisingly intense career. I thought, well, you're just writing people plans, aren't you? And then you're giving them feedback. But there is like so much more to the time demands of everything than I realised. That yeah, if you want to coach to a really high level, then it is going to take a lot of your time, and it's going to sap a huge amount of your sort of mental energy because you're emotionally invested in so many people and so many things at once. So it's understandable that not everybody can find the time to be performing at a really high level. But if you have someone who they've just stopped doing any training and now they spend their days sat telling other people what to do, I would question that a little bit myself. I go, okay, so how invested really is this person in the sport? There's also the go hard or go home crowd, those who are very clearly unsuitable for you and your goals that you are out to seek. Generally speaking, I mean, those are a lot of sort of red flags. that I would consider if someone's looking for coaches. But now let's flip it around. Let's talk about things more positive. Let's look at what I consider good coaching to be. Now, there are some people out there who will think, you know what, I bet he's just going to list everything that he does, isn't he? Yeah, I am actually, because doing anything otherwise would be hypocritical. I am far from a perfect coach. I'm sure I'm going to grow and I'm going to develop a lot over the next sort of 10, 15, 20 years, however long it is that I keep coaching, all the way to retirement, I hope. However, I do think it is good to have an idea of sort of the top skills that coaches need to be able to do their job really well, because often that doesn't always align with what an athlete always thinks, especially when they're first starting out in the sport. First one I'm going to start out with is communication. Now, this is something that I really struggled with when I first started out, and I don't think I'm alone in this, where I had this vast wealth of knowledge in my head from all of my years competing in the sport. But how do I turn that around? How do I share that with other people in a way that isn't overwhelming and confusing? I look back at some of the ways that I try to explain myself to athletes when I first started out. I cringe a bit. If you're just sort of talking about advanced concepts a little bit too early, and confusing people, if you're just not explaining things well, if you're tripping over your words, if you are just sort of really, you have the answers to their questions in your head, but trying to articulate that can be incredibly challenging. And to use an example from another industry, science communication is very different from sort of research science, as it were. There are very few people who are sort of lab scientists, research scientists, who can explain their research in a concise, coherent way, in a way that normal people can understand. That is the job of people who, if you go to a museum like the Science Museum, they'll have an explainer team, and their job is literally to explain the concepts in a way that people understand. Because it's all about finding where somebody is, how much it is that they know, and deciding how much it is that you want to tell them. So to use an example, a triathlon example, I remember I was teaching somebody who was a very nervous cyclist about changing gears. And I talked to them about the chain set, how to change your big ring and your small ring, and the cassette. And after a while, I taught them about half shifting, which is where you sort of fettle the levers a little bit. Most levers have this to stop the chain from cross chaining. Now, I thought at the time that this was a natural progression, when in fact it was too advanced. This person was a nervous cyclist. They didn't need to worry about that. What I should have said instead is, here's how you change your gears. Okay, let's go in small. And do you hear that noise? Yep, that noise there. If you find yourself in that gear, change gears, because you're cross-chained, that's inefficient, and it will damage your chain over time. That's a lot easier than trying to explain to somebody the concept of half shifting, and not only how they do it, but also when it is that they want to do it, and I just tied myself in absolute knots over it. And this is something that I think all coaches struggle with to an extent. When they go, okay, so I have all of this knowledge, but how can I share this in a way that people are going to be interested in, that people will engage with, and, in some cases that people are willing to spend money on? For those of you who have been with the podcast since the start, or have gone back and listened through all the episodes, I'm sure you'll have picked up on some changes in how it is, the confidence levels that I have on the mic, how I've got better at maybe sort of explaining certain things. These are all skills which you're always working on day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. Nobody's ever going to be a master at communication. That is extremely difficult. But if you have a coach that claims to have all the answers, but can't actually communicate that, or send somebody a really complicated training plan, but without actually explaining how to follow it, with a number of assumptions in there, that's not good coaching in my opinion. Good coaching is be able to communicate coherently, clearly, sharing the information the athlete needs to know, and not a huge amount else. The next skill I want to look at, I mean, it's not really a skill as such, but it's empathy. So it is the ability to be able to listen to an athlete if they come to you with concerns, fears, stresses, whatever it is. They come to you with a problem in their life and they want some help. They want to feel listened to. And they don't want somebody to simply say, "Oh, well, you've got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps." Somebody's going to listen, and somebody is not necessarily going to help. I mean, as coaches, we do have to respect personal boundaries. If somebody comes to me looking for advice about their marriage, for instance, of course, I'm going to say, "Look, I'm not really sure I can help you there." But you need somebody who can listen and somebody who can suggest changes we can make to our training to accommodate whatever it is that they're going through. And this is one of the skills that I think some sort of elite athletes can struggle with is, if for them it was their job to turn up and train every day, it's very difficult for them to justify sort of missing a session. Whereas for us as age groupers, we don't really want to be chewed out because we woke up absolutely exhausted because our kid was unwell during the night and so we weren't able to get a 45-minute run in. Be able to understand someone, meet them where they're at, and, to show understanding when things don't go quite so well. I think that is a key triathlon coaching skill. Something else which I think is a good sign, a green flag with a coach, is one who is willing to give away a lot of information and help for free. Whether that is sort of certain products they're offering, whether it is, something like this podcast maybe, whether it's YouTube videos, whether it's sort of taster plans for 4 weeks. Coaches who don't immediately say, right, before we do anything, I want my money. They charge a consultation fee for what is essentially a sales call. Or the other one is those who have sort of minimum commitment. That's always a little bit of a red flag for me. Now, I know some coaches that I like and I respect that do this, but honestly, I want athletes who work with me to sit there and go, I am working with you because I want to work with you. I'm not working with you because I had to sign up for 6 months. I think you're kind of a dickhead. And I don't feel that I'm improving, but I want to get my money's worth and then I'm out of here as soon as I can. I always set the plans up on, look, this is on a rolling monthly basis. If it doesn't work for you, we can go our separate ways. No hard feelings. And I think there's only ever happened once. Because, I want to get that sort of feeling of trust, I want to sort of athletes to feel that I'm trusting them and they're trusting me. And have I been burned by this a couple of times? By athletes who've come along and sort of used me and then disappeared and never paid me a penny? Yeah, I have. But I think it's worth it because I think that kind of attitude has won a lot of athletes over because they don't feel pressured in the same way that they would otherwise. Next up is sound technical knowledge. Now, this is something that it's almost getting overlooked in some respects in modern coaching. I remember a quote from the Brownlees running coach, Malcolm Brown, which was that technical knowledge is essential but not sufficient. So you need to have a good level of technical knowledge, but that only gets you part of the way through. If an athlete sends me a swim video or I watch them swim, or even running or cycling, I need to be able to look at that footage and to immediately be able to spot points of points of improvement. Go, oh, that leg kick there, that's not quite right, or all the arms are coming in too close to the head, the arms sweeping under the centre of the body, we've got a bit of a thumb first entry there. I need to go through and I need to spot all of these and I need to be able to then go, okay, here are some issues and here's how we fix them. I need to be able to talk athletes through basic bike skills, repairs. I need to be able to go through and set up a Training Peaks account with everybody's zones in. There's all of this technical knowledge that is really required to do the job well. Now, I guess with technical knowledge, you do tend to get to a point where you know just about everything that you really need to know within the first few years of coaching for most people. And the rest of it all comes down to that more kind of personable skill, the art of coaching more than the science of coaching. You can catch up with the technical skills relatively quickly, but they are still really important. If you have this coach who is all really cuddly and everyone's best friend, and they really motivate people, but they can't actually answer questions about the technical aspects of the sport, then they're not really the full package as far as coaching goes. Next one I'm going to cover is goal setting. Now, helping athletes set a goal is actually surprisingly tough. Now, sometimes it can be really easy if an athlete comes to you with something as simple as, I want to complete an Ironman. However, within our training cycle itself, we might want to slip a few goals in there, such as being able to hit a certain 5k time, such as being able to maybe sort of lift a certain weight in strength and conditioning, or simply be able to tick off, sort of 100% compliance of sessions for a complete month. Now, all these little goals are being set along the way. Additionally, there is the fact that goals will change throughout a training year as well. What may come across as being a wildly optimistic goal when somebody starts working with me may actually feel really very achievable if training's going really well. We might want to go, hey, you know what? Why don't we aim for something a bit faster? Also, sometimes you just have to sort of stop athletes from making silly decisions as a coach. I can't remember who it was. Somebody said that a lot of the job of coaching is helping an athlete get out of their own way. And it is, as an example, I will take an athlete who I'm working with at the moment who has completed a half distance triathlon before. They had a really strong bike, but their run was really lacking. They found themselves, walking a large portion of it, and they wanted some help to try and get their run up to scratch this time and set themselves a nice PB. And I had a phone call with them, and they said, yeah, I'm thinking about, because last year I did the bike in 3 hours, I'm thinking of aiming for 2 hours 50 this time. And maybe able to say, look, realistically, what is more important than the bike split is you being able to run the entirety of the run non-stop. Could we aim at sort of saving 10 minutes on the bike? Maybe you're a strong cyclist, but I'd much rather make sure that you come off the bike feeling really good in 3 hours and go out and have a fantastic half marathon than come off the bike in 250 really tired and then guess what? You're going to walk the half marathon again. So it's being able to help people get the right goals for where they are, goals that are going to push them, but ultimately goals that are going to help them achieve what their overarching ambition is. Next up is the ability to motivate an athlete. And this is something that doesn't come super naturally to me. Honestly, a lot of athletes that come to me are already really motivated. Not many triathletes are lacking in motivation, at least when they start. The issue is when they get really deep into the training and that motivation can start to wane. And so that's something that I try to think of it as being, I want to maintain somebody's current levels of motivation rather than I want to be their biggest cheerleader and I want to tell them they're doing a super job. And I am trying to get better at really sort of making a bit of a fuss over athletes when they do something that's beyond our expectations, something that's incredible. But I'm never going to be the kind of a coach who just is always giving sort of meaningless positive reinforcement. Motivation is different for different people, and the kind of athletes that I attract are going to want a different kind of motivation to the kind of athletes that another coach will attract. And you know what? That's fine. But we are going to be, you are going to need some level of be able to build people up, motivate them, get them wanting to complete the training, wanting to complete their event. And that is an essential skill for good coaching. So another skill for good coaching is the ability to engage in a feedback loop. So this is obviously it's critical. A lot of people love to give advice on people swimming, whether it's somebody giving you unsolicited advice in the pool, another swimmer, or whether it's a coach who's pulling people up on their technique and trying to find ways that they can help them improve. And yes, it's very helpful if you have somebody on poolside who keeps saying, "Oh, you dropped your right elbow on your breaststroke." or I think you need to sort of engage more of your catch. You're not pushing all the way back during the pull to be able to give you those really, quick sort of simple fixes. However, sort of the feedback loop itself, it's really critical. It really comes into its own when it comes to online triathlon coaching. Now, online triathlon coaching is something that a lot of people will dismiss the idea of. Oh, why would you work with an online coach? I want my coach with me. Well, it is. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but for me as a coach, I'd much rather be able to oversee an athlete's entire training than simply watch them swim for 45 minutes a week and congratulate them on a good job as they get out. Which one is going to have more impact? Now, if you are a very new swimmer new triathlete, sorry, you may gain more benefit from in-person coaching to start with. But if you really want to improve, if you really want to achieve your potential as a triathlete, working with someone who's going to plan out all of your sessions is critical, because it doesn't matter how good one session a week is. If you then go and absolutely make the worst choices with all the rest of your training, which a lot of triathletes are very good at, then that really is going to limit your development. However, the downside to online triathlon coaching is that you're not there. You're not able to see an athlete as they're training most of the time, unless we're doing a face-to-face session. I'm not there to see them, and I can't see how tired they are. I can't see exactly how the session went just from the data. So a good feedback loop involves not just me as a coach giving that athlete feedback. It also is critical that the athlete gives me feedback. In fact, I guess, being on the other side of it, hearing from an athlete how it is they feel the training is going, what they need to do, what they need to improve on, is far more valuable to me than looking through the data. Okay, the data's nice. I can look through the data and I can see if somebody has really struggled to hit the last few intervals. I can then sort of ask them why that might be. If somebody was over the prescribed pace, I can pull them up on that and say, hey, we need to slow it down here. Equally, if they're below the target pace, so why is it that we were below today? But trying to find out from the athlete how they were feeling, where they are in their head at the moment, where their body is, that really is the most critical part of coaching, because you need to be able to adjust somebody's training depending on how they feel. And this is why the ability to give and receive feedback is so critical in good coaching. Now, if you have a coach who is really good at their job, you probably won't even realise that they're giving you feedback a lot of the time, or that they're or the bits they're trying to extract from you, because it will just feel a bit more like a casual conversation. It will more feel like you're sharing a few ideas rather than kind of this very kind of formal, you've done that wrong, that's not good enough. Kind of what some people might associate feedback with, and those who get sort of a bit defensive around it. It's much more a way of helping us kind of, sort of me as a coach, understand you as an athlete and try to understand how I can help you grow. A skill that a lot of coaches really struggle with is problem solving. Now, it's very easy for me to go away and to write somebody a training plan for them to help complete an Ironman. I go, okay, so we'll have a long run on the Saturday, long run on the Sunday. We'll drop in 1, maybe 2 strength and conditioning sessions, have some easy sessions, probably a couple of interval sessions in there. And I'll go through and I'll rinse and I'll repeat that throughout the sort of the duration of the plan until somebody gets to their target event. There we go. That's how you train for your event. However, life just isn't that simple. It's very rare that somebody comes to me and I find myself writing for them the kind of training plan that I would write if I was going to sell it as a one-time product. You have people who go, oh, I have sort of Saturdays need to be my rest day, because that is a really critical day that I spend with my family. I have to go, okay, so if we can't train on Saturdays, that means we've only got the Sundays to fit in long sessions. So how is it that I can go about that? How can I make that work? Well, I guess if we, the bike is the most time intensive session. So if we make sure that we do our longer rides on Sundays, how long is the event we're training for? Oh, it's a 70.3. Okay, so given that, our long runs might not be much over sort of 90 minutes, 2 hours tops for a lot of people. Is there any chance you could fit that in on Thursday instead? And as the athlete has said to me they can't do Saturdays, and they respect and that I've acknowledged that, a lot of them kind of, well, I guess, it'd be an early start, especially as we get further in the training. But yeah, I think I could probably fit that in. Now that's a pretty simple one. You have somebody who has just got a scheduling error that is going to be the same every week. But sometimes athletes come to me and go, "Oh, my pool's closed for refurbishment for the next month, so I can't swim. The next closest pool is an hour away from me," and it's like, yeah, it's just not worth it. An hour, to go for the sake of a swim. So you then have to adapt the plan based on that. You then have all sorts of issues, I guess, when it comes to illness, when it comes to injury, when it comes to sort of setting strength and conditioning sessions. If somebody has a mobility issue they struggle with, you take that into consideration. Because at the end of the day, if an athlete hires a coach, they're hiring a coach to solve their problems for them. If it was as simple as buying a £50 training plan off Training Peaks and that's all you ever needed, okay, there would be no need for coaches such as myself. When the fact is that there are thousands of full-time triathlon coaches across the globe because there is that demand, because triathlon coaching is complex, it is confusing, and people need someone to help them with the problem solving of their training. And if a coach can't solve a problem, they're not much of a coach. Positivity is something that a lot of coaches are deeply lacking in. The ones who sit there with their arms crossed, watching athletes train. Nothing's ever quite good enough for them. They're always, blowing their whistle, calling people out. They get great joy in putting others down because they think that is tough love. That is how we get faster athletes. But this is 2025. This is the 21st century. We now know that very few people respond to that kind of coaching where they're always being put down, putting the fear of God into people. That's how you get the best out of them, rather than, listening to them and, adapting the training and your coaching approach around them, those kinds of skills. And I do think that positivity, it goes a long way. If you have an athlete who they look at their coach and they don't feel they can ever do anything right, they're always being criticised, the coach is always sort of doubting them, and they feel they've got to prove themselves to that coach to gain their approval. In the same way that I think a lot of people, I want to get the approval of my parents, I want to make my parents proud, I want to make my coach proud. I mean, okay, I get that it works for some people. I think the majority of people, they'd much rather work with a coach who is excited to work with them and help them achieve their goals and wants to be there every step of the way. It's a coach who they feel that they can be vulnerable to, who they can open up to, who is going to be involved in their journey rather than someone who's going to be distant. Now, I'm definitely not talking about toxic positivity here. This is something I have a huge bugbear with in club coaching, which is where you have a coach who's gone out and they've got their level 1 and they're coaching a group of athletes, and I call them the Mother Goose coach, is what I've, the term that I've coined for myself, where they have their flock who they look after, and all they ever want to do is provide them with positivity and lift them up, and everything's wonderful, and you're all doing brilliantly, and come on, let's go. And if I then, as sort of more of an exercise professional, shall we say, as opposed to sort of a part-time volunteer coach, if I then engage with these athletes and go, oh, have you, you might want to think about this, if you considered this, and I start talking about how people can train more efficiently and optimize their training, I get chased away so quickly because they don't want those athletes to question themselves at all. It's all got to be sunshine and rainbows and flowers all of the time. And I find that highly sickening personally. I imagine you probably do as well. And I get that there may be some athletes out there who do need that. But equally, most athletes, they're grown adults. They can make their own decisions. And sometimes they need to hear some hard truths. And they need to hear they might want to change their approach or do something a bit differently. Because the downside of this excessive positivity is that athletes, they just don't develop as quickly as they could if you used a slightly different approach. Where yes, you do give them positive feedback. Not for the sake of it, but if you see them do something well, you definitely congratulate them. But you have to learn to have slightly sort of hard conversations with them, and if they push back at you, you have to learn to push back yourself sometimes, and sort of challenge their ideas and their ways of thinking. So it really is a balance. You can't have somebody who's excessively positive. You can't have somebody who's excessively negative. I think you need a coach who is motivated and driven, has that positive personality, but also somebody who's going to be honest and has learned to be able to tell you what it is that you need to hear in that moment in time. Having an eye for detail, I think, is absolutely imperative as a coach. Now, a lot of coaches can get themselves unstuck, especially newer coaches. And I look at, when I first started out, where they really, really focus on the data and the science and analysing everything to do with an athlete's data, getting everything absolutely lined up. And, a lot of good coaching is learning, obviously you have the ability to zoom in and to look at that, but also taking a big step back and going, okay, but how does this really affect somebody's overall training? Is this really important for somebody's development? However, you do need those skills to be able to zoom in and to have that eye for detail as and when needed. Now, if I am doing some face-to-face coaching, I need to be able to watch somebody swim 50 meters and to be able to have... if I'm doing a one-to-one swim session, we give an athlete 3 pieces of feedback. So any more, and it starts to overwhelm them, it starts to confuse them, they'll probably get a bit tired from me asking to do all these practices and these lengths. So I try to keep it down to 3 points, but I need to be able to pick those 3 points out quickly. Now, anyone can choose 3 points from somebody's stroke that's holding them back. Well, that's not difficult. In fact, I reckon a lot of you could look at professional athletes swimming and you could go, oh God, yeah, they're not pushing nearly as far back as they could. They're easy to pick things out, but I need to pick out the 3 things that are holding them back the most. And that comes from experience. That is, I've probably spent, upwards of 1,000 hours on poolside, between one-to-one coaching, group coaching, voluntary work, all of that. I have time on poolside to be able to pick those things out and to be able to spot errors and be able to organise them and to be able to go, okay, which ones are the most imperative for us to focus on at the moment? And what I'll often do if I'm on poolside with an athlete is I'll film them swimming. And I'll then take the footage and I'll then show the athlete when they're resting. And I go, oh, here we go, look at this. You see what your arm's doing there? Your arm's coming across there, and you play it in slow motion, you hold a freeze frame, and you show them that's what that's doing. That's causing your arm to sweep under you, which is causing your legs to kick further apart. And I think, oh, okay, great, so I'll take it on board. And you then explain it to the athlete and how it is that they fix it. And you then watch them do another length, ask them how it feels, maybe give them another coaching point to help them. But this all comes back to having that eye for detail, for small things in somebody's stroke and how that might be affecting their speed. Often the things that slow an athlete down the most aren't the most visibly obvious as well. One of the best tips I have for triathlon coaches is to make an athlete comfortable enough around you to be vulnerable, to come to you with concerns, with fears, with questions, with feedback, where they see you as being someone who is, a guiding light. Not this grumpy figure who always knows best, but a human being who they feel that they can come to and they can share things with you. Now, there is a definite difference here between club coaching and between one-to-one coaching. If I'm coaching a large group of people and an athlete comes up to me and they share something, they're being vulnerable, or they're asking me for some advice on something that's a bit of a sensitive topic, I've got to be very careful about how I proceed to respect those professional boundaries. I don't ever really tell athletes what to do with these things, but I can talk them through how it is that they might be able to, sort of some potential solutions. As an example, if I was as part of a group coaching session, someone were to come up to me and they're saying they're really struggling to make the sessions, to get their training in, because they'd recently lost a parent and they weren't sure if they should continue training or not, whether they should do their race. Obviously, they're asking me for advice about, and they're obviously feeling very vulnerable in this moment. And it would be wrong of me to just completely go, "Oh no, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you about that. I don't know you well enough." You have to learn how to be able to talk to people about these things, but with it remaining sort of with that professional distance and going, "Oh, you know what? I'm so sorry. I can only imagine. I can only imagine how tough things are for you right now. But you know what? Like, I really appreciate the fact that you're still coming to these sessions. I think everybody else in this session also really appreciates you here. Um, and it would be great if you could keep going. Now, obviously, I'm definitely not going to force you to come, and I don't mind if you miss a week or two. But it might help if you have that sort of bit more of a focus, bit more of a schedule in your life. And, if you have that race, if you feel that you're working towards something. Now, at no point there in that exchange am I telling them, "Oh, you need to keep going. Come on, it's good for you to keep coming. You should keep this up, it'll help you." But neither am I telling them, "Oh, no, oh, it's absolutely, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Whatever you can do." Because that athlete is probably looking for a bit of reassurance. They wouldn't have come to me if they weren't looking for some kind of connection or reassurance. And it's just being able to provide it to someone in that way. Now, if I was a coach who they thought was quite intimidating, who they wouldn't feel they could have that conversation with, they might just have stopped coming to the sessions and never mention why. And, that would be a shame, that would be a loss. Now, when I'm coaching one-to-one, this is very different. Now, obviously, I still really need to respect those professional boundaries, okay? I am not a mental health professional. I'm not someone who is sort of a counsellor or a therapist. I can't sit there and I can't talk somebody through their divorce. That would be highly inappropriate. What I can do is I can listen, and I can make the right sympathetic noises and I can shout, "Oh, that must be really hard. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Oh yes, I know someone who went through a similar thing." So they feel that they're being heard. There's that active listening component there. But then I can then ask them, "Okay, so how is it that we can change our training based on this?" And that gives them the opportunity to say to me, "Well, some people cope an awful lot better following something like this if they just get their head down and they do lots of training and they lose themselves in that and they really focus." Other people, it could be that they want to take a bit of a step back from the training, maybe even a break from the training, if there are things that they feel that they need to work through. And, I really, if I wasn't that figure who somebody felt they could have that conversation with, then they may well just sort of drop me a message to go, "Oh, I'm sorry, I need to leave the coaching program. I'm going through some personal difficulties at the moment." Now, for me as a business owner in this example with a one-to-one athlete, that's a loss of a monthly coaching fee. However, it's also an athlete who won't be training, who won't be enjoying the sport in a time in which actually staying in the sport could be the best thing for them. So you need to look beyond just sort of the immediate and need to go, okay, by making myself an approachable figure, by making myself something that someone feels comfortable around, this can have a huge impact, not just on their performance as much as you would want to get faster, but also their general well-being and mental health. Now, the vast majority of positive traits I've listed here come under the banner of something called emotional intelligence, or EQ, as some people call it, which is essentially the ability to read people, the ability to be able to say the right thing at the right time, in the right situation, to get the best out of people. It's the opposite of the "I know best, everybody look at me, everybody listen to me" figure, which, to be honest, you get quite a bit of that in triathlon coaching, where you get people who have their plan that they like to sell and they stand up and they talk about how great they are, how great their plan is, how they can achieve this, they can do this. And a lot of athletes will flock towards someone like that, someone who's so sure of themselves. has all this experience, such a great athlete. Once they actually start the coaching program, they start to is actually that the support isn't really there that they need or that they would like, and they have questions and they don't really get the answers to, and it's all about, well, you got to toughen up, you got to push through, you got to do this and this. And this is how a lot of people fall out of the sport, is that they get given an inappropriate plan. They have very little in the way of feedback or adjustments to that plan, and it really becomes a major struggle for them to just turn up for a day of training. Because to get the most out of an athlete, you really need to get inside their head. You really need to truly understand their motivations. You can't just go, oh, another Ironman athlete. Well, I guess we're gonna coach them like this. You need to listen to them. If they turn around and they go, oh, you know what? I just can't do VO2 max work. Like, my legs just don't agree with that. I can't hold that duration. I can't do that. Then you have to go, okay, well, how am I gonna play this? Am I going to start doing some really short VO2 max bits and slowly build them up? Or am I going to swerve that altogether? What distance event are they training for? How many hours have they got in a week? It's the ability to be able to read an athlete, see where they are, and then come up with the best solution to help them move forward. It's also about knowing what to say and when. It's about choosing the exact words that you use. I mean, some of the conversations I have with athletes, I know that if I use the wrong word, their sense of self can come crashing down like a house of cards. And so I have to really pay attention to every word that I'm using, everything I'm thinking about. And these conversations are exhausting, and often I need to take an hour off because of how draining that conversation is. Because I'm trying to make sure that I'm focused, I'm attentive, I'm using the right words, I'm taking my time, and I'm telling the athlete what it is that they need to hear in that moment. Now, a lot of the time, you are just there to listen to the athlete. And, again, I don't generally tell people what to do a huge amount of time, but sometimes you need to give them some hard truths. If somebody is constantly going too fast in their easy runs, there's something I need to address. But I need to address it in a way that is going to get them on board, which is going to help them understand the benefits of these Zone 2 sessions and why it is that is critical to their performance. If I just say, slow down, slow down, slow down, and I don't explain why it is that I need it, if I use the wrong turn, especially when we're communicating via text message or Training Peaks comments or emails, if I write a message out really quickly and just hit send, and I have used the wrong word, that makes me come across as being a bit sort of angry or passive aggressive, okay, that can have massive repercussions to the trust that I've developed with that athlete. Now, the final thing that I recommend that you look for in a good coach is experience. And this is something that is impossible to synthesize, okay? You just need time coaching athletes to be able to become the best coach that you can. So a bit of an example as to why this is important. Last week I wrote a week of training for an athlete of mine who is an executive for a large UK company, and he does a lot of travelling between here and Southeast Asia. And he spends quite a bit of time out training in the humidity and the heat over there, often at short notice. And when I was writing the week of training, I looked, because I knew that he'd be back in the UK on the weekend. I looked back at the training we'd done over the last few weeks, because we can't use the traditional periodization model because of how much he travels. But I looked at the training and I thought to myself, we've done an awful lot of marathon pace work. He's training for a sub-3 marathon. Done a huge amount of marathon pace work in our long runs. I think he needs a week off of this. He's training for London. It's the end of March. I think we just take 1 week where we go back to like having a sort of a steady state run. I think we did sort of about 2.5 hours, I set. Nice steady state run. And then we go back to the marathon pace work and the intervals from next week onwards. But I left the caveat, if your legs are feeling really good, feel free to increase the intensity a bit. So I got a text from him on the Sunday morning saying, you know what, I'm feeling pretty good. I'd like to push this run a bit. I said, okay, let's take the run that we're doing at the moment, but let's stick in a 90-minute block of marathon pace work in there. So he says, great, I'll do that. Heads off for his run. And I then get a text after his run saying, oh, you know what, my legs just didn't have the marathon pace in them at the moment, so I changed it to the original steady state run. And this is the kind of thing that you only really gain with experience as a coach, knowing an athlete, knowing how athletes work, knowing how to structure coaching, where without looking at your TSB numbers and your TSS numbers, and without going through this, sort of looking over an athlete's training, keeping an eye on things, remember the conversations you've had with them, and just thinking, yeah, you know what, I think we're going to need a little bit of an easier weekend this week. And it's almost like coaching spidey senses, you know? It is sort of just that understanding, that foresight, and just, calling all the experience, all the mistakes that you've made previously. Now, every coach needs to start somewhere. And when a coach starts their business, chances are they'll be giving away their bespoke coaching for sort of £40-50 a month, I reckon, depending on the amount of kind of feedback and the level of sort of planned writing that they give you. You can look to be paying that kind of amount. And you know what? There is a good chance that you'll find somebody who is actually really good at their job. And they just need some more athlete testimonials, they just need some more experience, they just need a bit more behind them before they can have the courage to start charging, a bit more. Or there's a chance you could end up working with someone who could actually do your training more harm than good. And I'm going to put my hand up and say I can think of at least one athlete who, I regret to say, may have actually ended up being faster if they hadn't have come to me. I ended up sort of overtraining them, and they didn't, I guess, they could have done more to share how tired they were. But it's always a bit of a minefield if you're working with somebody who is very new to triathlon coaching, if only because there are a number of people who are sort of very fast triathletes, or in some cases, very average triathletes. You think, oh, I'm going to be a coach, I'm going to start a coaching business, and, coaching just isn't for them, and they pack it in after a couple of years. The amount of people who sort of reach the level that I have, I mean, 9 years I've been doing this now, 9 years next month. And, that's given me a pretty solid foundation. It's given me a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge. The amount of people who stick with it for as long as I have is relatively low. But if you then look at people who've been doing it for 30, 40 years, okay, they're just working on another level to people like me. And you may look at sort of some of the fees that they charge. I know that I can think of one coach who charges $1,000 a month. You may know who I'm referring to. And a lot of people go on, how on earth would he ever be worth $1,000? Think, well, this person is head of a large coaching company. That's another clue for you there. But they've been doing it for so long and with so much success that if triathlon is the single most important thing in someone's life, and it's so important for them to go to the Ironman World Championships, if they hired a coach for 8 months, would they pay $8,000 to almost guarantee the ability to get to the Ironman World Championships? Well, if they're worth multi-7 figures, they may well do. Now, what an experienced coach can bring to the table that you wouldn't have from an inexperienced coach, well, it's just degrees of competence in all of the matters that we have discussed. Is having an eye for detail that other more junior coaches might have missed. It's the ability to have a conversation with an athlete in a way that I wouldn't be able to currently. But it's definitely a sliding scale. It's how much are you willing to spend versus the return that it is that you're getting. There is that sweet spot. And I think a lot of coaches around my level, you're looking at that kind of somewhere between sort of £200 and £500 a month for those services. And we go, well, that's quite a lot of money. Yes, it is a lot of money. And, I would like to be able to charge less. But the fact of the matter is, If I am working with an athlete, I have to remember their goals, their schedule, their personal life. I have to remember all of their injuries. I have to take consider their availability. I have to go through, I have to check all the training data, leave comments on all of their workouts. I have calls with a lot of them on a regular basis. And there's only so many athletes who it is that you can keep that level of service with. You know, writing bespoke strength and conditioning workouts every single week, going through creating race plans, doing deep dives into data. It's very heavy work, both on my time, but also mentally, to be able to hold all that information, to be able to give the athletes the best service that I can. And if I were to charge £100 a month, how many athletes would I need to work with to be able to pay my bills? Probably more athletes than I'd be able to coach competently. I'd start really getting my wires crossed. Oh, I'm sorry, I got you mixed up with Jack. You're Jeff. Yes, sorry, let me go in and change that now. I mean, there's a little bit of that anyway. I'm a human at the end of the day. But you're not just paying for somebody's time that they spend writing the plans and on the phone with you and all of that. You're also paying for all of the years of accumulated experience. It's like a master tradesman. If you were to get a carpenter in to help you with an extension, to do do a difficult bit of joinery, you would expect to pay a lot of money for somebody to come in. And yeah, guess what? The saw that they're using, the sawhorse they're using, it's nothing special, but you are paying that person a very high hourly rate to save you money in the long term. And the value of a triathlon coach comes in almost protecting your investment. Now, if somebody were to work with me to help them prepare for an Ironman event, depending on the level of coaching they wanted from me, it could be sort of anything from £300 up to sort of 2,000, I think. And it depends on the budget they have. But if you look at the Ironman entry fee, if you look at the cost of flights, of hotels, of bikes, bike servicing, clothing, race suits, nutrition, if you look at everything that you're investing into your race, you're investing an enormous amount of not just cash, but also your time. Okay, I mean, what's more valuable than our time, right? You're investing so much into this journey. And that by almost taking out that insurance of hiring a coach to make sure that your training is actually efficient and doing what it's supposed to be doing, I mean, it's probably some of the best money that you can spend in triathlon. And by working with a coach who is more experienced, you're just probably going to have a better experience. You are going to have a better chance of protecting your investment. And if you, especially you're on a more of a performance journey, if you really want to qualify for a world championship event, it's not impossible to do it on your own. I mean, it'd be silly of me to say this. I mean, a lot of triathletes were just self-coached up until I guess the noughties, before the first people who really kind of helped triathletes training started appearing on the market. Previously, it was just sort of a bit of an adventure. But it massively extends the chances of you achieving your goals if you're working with the right coach for you. And that is the thing. I am not the right coach for everyone. There are some athletes who've been with me for over 5 years, and we have a fantastic working relationship. We get on really well. We know each other. There are also some athletes I've worked with for a couple of months, and they've gone, yeah, you know what, the relationships felt a bit strained, and it's just, yeah, I think I need to find someone else. Cool, it's probably the best for the both of us. Different coaches are going to offer different things, and you need to do a little bit of shopping around to try and find the athlete who has kind of the experience in approach that that's going to work for you. So to conclude very briefly, I think bad coaching is a coach who is very, very sure of their own ability. It's okay to be proud of achievements that you've had, but somebody who's incredibly sure of their own ability, and somebody who doesn't really build a connection with athletes, someone who thinks they know it all, someone who is, in it I guess if they're a commercial coach, somebody who's clearly in it for the money, for the passive income. As a good coach, meanwhile, is someone who's emotionally intelligent, somebody who's curious, somebody who is interested in developing themselves as much as their athletes. And, somebody who makes an effort to get to know their athletes. Somebody who is just that, just a good human being. I know that sounds really silly, but, if you have a coach who you just think is a stand-up person, who is great, who listens to you, who listens to everyone else, who is really driven and passionate about the sport, you're going to feel a lot more motivated, you're going to get a lot more out of your training than somebody who's a bit of a miserable old git who is peddling the same Ironman coaching program they have for the last 20 years. So I think I've probably rambled on enough now. That in my mind is what makes a good triathlon coach. And if you're listening to all that and you're thinking, yeah, you know what, that sounds like the kind of coach I'd like to work with, I'm going to drop my email and my website in the show notes for you to look at. Alternatively, wherever it is that you're looking for a coach, whether it's in person, one-to-one, whether it's group coaching, wherever you're looking at, just consider all of these and ask yourself, is this coach really going to be getting the best out of me, or are they limiting my development as much as helping it? Wishing you all the best for the week of training ahead. See you all next week. Take care now.